Hello, this is Patrick Barnard in Montreal. It is January 21st, 2026. This is the 31st International Press Review, and I'm sitting here holding two French magazines in my lap because the topic of this 31st International Press Review is China, seen through French eyes. These two French magazines that I've been looking at are among the most popular in France. They're both published in Paris. Le Nouvel Observateur I've been reading for a very, very long time. There you can see its cover, China, the irresistible expansion of an empire. And then in Le Point, China, the empire that is shaking the world. Isn't it fascinating? These two numbers of these two magazines came out at almost exactly the same time at the turn of the year. The title on the front page of each is almost exactly the same. That is very telling in itself. The place of China in today's world has a lot to do with what's going on inside the United States. We'll get to that later. For the moment, Canadians are focused on China because the Canadian Prime Minister, Mr. Mark Carney, has just gone to that country and secured a trade deal which fits in with his strategy of diversifying Canadian trade. Then as soon as he'd done that, he went to Davos, Switzerland, and gave a very important speech about the role of middle powers in a world dominated by hegemonic competition between China and the United States. Let's listen to a description of the trade deal supplied to us by Canadian television, Global TV.
Well, Prime Minister Mark Carney came to China with one key objective, and that was to reduce punishing tariffs that China had imposed on Canadian canola. And by that measure, Carney largely succeeded. It took a final one-on-one meeting between the two leaders, Chinese President Xi Jinping acknowledging a new chapter in relations between the two countries.
Prime Minister Carney, welcome to China.
Thank you, President Xi, for your hospitality.
China agreed to drop canola tariffs from as much as 85% down to 15%, and to do that by March 1st. Chinese tariffs will also be cut on Canadian lobsters, crabs, and peas.
Together, these results will unlock nearly $3 billion of export orders for Canadian farmers, fish harvesters, and processors.
Canada, for its part, will allow China to export up to 49,000 electric vehicles into the Canadian market.
The trade negotiation that you have seen just described by Canadian television really is a kind of return to the status quo ante, because the previous Liberal government here, before the Carney Group, had slapped a 100% tariff on Chinese electrical vehicles. That government then was following the American government of the day. The car tariff led to a Chinese tariff against Canadian canola. Canada's the greatest canola producer in the world. Now there's been a leveling of the playing field. The electrical cars from China can come back into Canada, and most importantly for this country, the agricultural exports can go out to China, and they are very considerable. So here we are in January 2026. It's not quite the status quo ante, certainly not for Canada, nor for the world as a whole, because of what's going on with Trump's United States and the whole rest of humanity. And behind this story lies the presence of China today. So let's get back to our two magazines, which are our lens, our perspective for looking at China, Le Point and Le Nouvel Observateur. Le Nouvel Observateur, I think, gives a very good long background of China in its special dossier, and it takes readers all the way back to the year 221 BC. And the man who was known as the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, forgive my pronunciation, that's his name, Qin Shi Huang, and he was the first man to consolidate state power in China. You are looking at an imagined portrait of the man known as Qin Shi Huangdi, and that is his Full title in Chinese history, the first emperor. He created the centralized state. He created a road system for ancient China and the Great Wall as well. A very important figure, and dynasties which followed him over 2,000 years created a functioning civil service for which you had to take very difficult exams. That was the basis of the Mandarinate. And also there were a series of scientific discoveries in China. Paper, printing, the compass, gunpowder. And until the 19th century, China was the uncontested, most populous country in the world, and its richest one as well. Hence a place greatly coveted by the Europeans. And in these two French magazines, there's an implicit comparison between the first emperor and the man who rules China now. There is a kind of parallel between the man who leads China today, Xi Jinping, and all the people who preceded him in the past. And a key event in China's past was what was called the Century of Humiliation, which began with the terrible Opium Wars that Britain carried out against the Chinese in the 19th century. It was a period of unequal treaties and of a kind of dismemberment of China, and it's still remembered today. Our two French magazines, Le Point and Le Nouvel Observateur, cover all of this. It's very interesting that their attitude, I would say, towards China today is one of respect, but also of a very marked fear. It's something that I don't quite understand, but it's very real in Western Europe and in North America. Le Nouvel Observateur ends its introductory section to the whole long dossier that it's published with this comment. The great Chinese pride of today is to have finally buried the century of humiliation. We, and this means we French, must do everything we can to see that it is not our humiliation that is beginning. I must say I find this idea of a European humiliation at the hands of the Chinese a bit strange, but this is a feeling you find in the world of today. This fear of China, I believe, goes far beyond worries about autocracy and questions of regime. Look at this chart in the French magazine Le Point. It's about robots, and you can see that China is outproducing the United States in terms of the production of robots by about 5 times. China is forging ahead of all other countries in terms of green technology, the production of solar panels, windmills. Pakistan, for example, now produces 1/3 of its electricity from solar panels supplied by China. The economist, the Nobel Prize-winning American economist Paul Krugman, published a Substack in November of last year saying about the U.S. and China economies, we, the United States, we are number 2, how Trump ceded the future to China. I think that's very true. Now, Chinese economics is a combination of supply-side economics and Keynesianism. There are major problems attached to this enormous productivity, but there's no one who can deny it. And that, I think, is the source of this fear in a world that is so highly competitive as ours is. The graph that you've just seen used by Paul Krugman is based on purchasing parity. It's a rough estimation of an economy, and Krugman says the Chinese are already ahead of the Americans. They have a larger economy. Well, among Wall Street financial firms, such as Goldman Sachs, there are graphs circulating already which show that in traditional measurements of GDP, China, within a very short period of time, will have a larger economy than the United States, and by 2050, a much larger economy. This is the China reality behind MAGA. Behind MAGA's spray gun approach of using tariffs against nearly every country in the world, it seems, in order to boost the importance of the United States. behind this strategy lies a terrible sense, actually, of fear and inadequacy, and you might even say humiliation. We are now at January 26, 2026, and into this drama of the hegemons and economic competition and tariffs and global disorder even, stepped Mark Carney 6 days ago, the Prime Minister of Canada. And he gave a speech which suggested, rightly I think, that all of this is part of a very large sea change in the world. He delivered a speech at Davos that really struck a chord.
We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
Mark Carney's speech was explicitly addressed to the middle powers, to Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the European countries taken singly rather than as a union, and there was tremendous applause when he finished. The Trump administration did not like the speech because it told, I believe, the truth. And now Carney has a problem because he's going to have to continue to seek middle power diversification for his trade, that is to say, for Canada's trade. He's going to have to carry out his words in practice. That is what is being said about him here in Canada by both enemies of the Liberal Party and friends. So let us see how China and its influence will bear upon this future bit of history, which involves Canada. And that's the story of China, France, and Canada in the world of 2026.